Good afternoon. Well, good morning. I'm Dayton City Commissioner Matt Joseph. Very proud to welcome you here. Distinguished guests, Your Excellencies, Mayor Whaley, ladies and gentlemen, dear friends. Welcome to the keynote luncheon of the commemoration of the 20th anniversary of the Dayton Peace Accords. We have had a productive and interesting morning of discussion. We look forward to more of the same later today. I want to lead off expressing our great appreciation to the sponsors who made this possible. Without their help, this would not have happened. All these great people wouldn't have come together, and all these perhaps great possibilities for the future of Bosnia and Herzegovina would not have happened. These sponsors are the University of Dayton, the City of Dayton, Dayton International Airport, Sinclair Community College, Miami University and Wright State University, the Dayton Foundation, Montgomery County, Hans and Sherry Chuden, the Dayton International Peace Museum, the Chamber of Commerce, the Business Journal, Bob Ross Auto Group, the Greater Dayton Transit Authority, and the Dayton Sister City Committee. Thank you very much to those sponsors. Our committee thanks those sponsors and all of you who have helped our community keep us focused on peace. Peace here, peace nationally, and peace internationally. Now it's my great pleasure to introduce my friend and colleague, Ms. Carolyn Rice, the Montgomery County Treasurer and the Logistics Chair for the Dayton Peace Accords at 20 Committee. Ms. Rice.
It is indeed an incredible honor and unique privilege to be one of the people to introduce our keynote speaker for today's luncheon, former President Bill Clinton. In a speech delivered near the end of his presidency to an audience in Northern Ireland, President Clinton remarked, "Peace is not a spectator sport. No one can afford to sit on the sidelines. The enemies of peace don't really need your approval. All they need is your apathy." In the quest for peace, no one could ever accuse President Clinton of being apathetic. In the struggle against the tragic consequences of war and violence, our keynote speaker was never one to sit idly on the sidelines. During his 8 years in the White House, President Clinton worked tirelessly to end conflicts in every corner of the globe. People all over the world were moved by his actions in pursuit of a just and lasting peace in the Middle East, in Northern Ireland, in nations of Africa and Latin America, in India and Pakistan. And of course, his bold and steadfast efforts to end the war in Bosnia and bring peace to the Balkans will forever help to define his legacy as a statesman and a world leader. But before we hear from President Clinton, the recipient of the 2000 Dayton Peace Prize and the 42nd President of the United States, it is my great pleasure to introduce the University of Dayton's Provost, Dr. Paul Benson. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Carolyn. On behalf of the University of Dayton's President, Dr. Dan Curran, it's my honor to welcome you to the University of Dayton's River Campus, the former world headquarters of NCR Corporation. I'd like to join Commissioner Joseph and extend a special welcome to our distinguished guests from Bosnia and Herzegovina and to the many important civic leaders and scholars from across the nation and from here in Dayton who have convened for this conference. Many of you are acquainted with Dayton's history as an international leader in scientific and technological innovation. From the Wright brothers, whom President Clinton just mentioned as it happened, and the birth of aviation, to John Patterson in the cash register and Charles Kettering in the self-starting automobile industry, Dayton was the Silicon Valley of the first half of the 20th century. Our legacy of innovation continues today in composite materials, fuels and energy storage technology, remote sensing and optical computing, and advanced manufacturing. With the Dayton Peace Accords, the city of Dayton also became, at the end of the 20th century, an historic site of innovation in peacemaking and peace building. We are justly proud of this legacy and have done much over the past 20 years to celebrate our place in world history as a city of peace, including the creation of the Dayton Literary Peace Prize, whose annual awards include the Richard C. Holbrook Award for Lifetime Achievement. The University of Dayton was founded in 1850 by the Society of Mary, a Catholic religious order that was born amidst the violent social upheavals prompted by the French Revolution. One of the pillars of our educational philosophy is that we educate for service, justice, and peace through the building of community among diverse people. We are joined here today by many students, not only at the University of Dayton, but other area colleges and universities and high schools, but especially by 3 university students from the Balkans, our Dayton Peace Accords Fellows, who will be studying this year at the University of Dayton. Their presence represents this commitment to educate leaders who build community. These students are supported by a partnership between the University of Dayton and the U.S. Embassy in Bosnia and Herzegovina. They are Zaneta Bejic from the International University of Sarajevo, Tamara Kulam from the University of Banja Luka, and Tomislav Vidovic from the University of Mostar. Would you please give them a hand to acknowledge their presence here? These Dayton Peace Accords Fellows embody the spirit of creative peacemaking and leadership in global community building that we hope all of those gathered here will always associate with Dayton and the ongoing legacy and future of the Accords. I'd now like to welcome to the stage His Excellency Mr. Igor Crnadak, who is the Minister of Foreign Affairs from Bosnia and Herzegovina. Mr. Crnadak.
Okay, hello everybody. It's really good to be here. I will be short and I will try to bring you a little bit, a little piece of atmosphere from 20 years ago back in Bosnia and Herzegovina, in my hometown. So 20 years ago, the war in Bosnia was stopped by signing and having the Dayton Agreement here in Dayton, Ohio. And after almost 4 years, the bloodshed and the chaos and the terror of the war came to an end. And I will repeat what I said earlier. I believe that we do not appreciate this enough and that we do not respect this enough. And I hope that this will be the turning point after 20th anniversary, that it will be finally different. But as I said, let me share one little small interesting thing from that time. As a very young man, like all of you here, I was 20 years younger than today. I worked at a local radio station in 1995. And let me remind you, it was not only the time that we didn't have the internet, but also most of the households did not have electricity power. And so the radio, which they would connect to different batteries, was the only way to get any kind of information. And actually, this radio station was the only one in Banja Luka region where I used to live. And this is a little bit personal maybe, but because the reason why we gathered here, I thought it was an interesting thing to tell. Actually, I was the first one to announce on the air that there was an agreement and that the war actually was over. And the two kind reactions we had after that. One was hundreds and thousands phone calls. There was no cell phones. People called each other from their homes, their relatives, their friends, saying that the war was over. And also, there was hundreds and thousands shotguns going on, or shots being fired in the air, because people were celebrating. And everybody, almost everybody had a gun. And, you know, I think that this little story tells you a little bit about the atmosphere at the time, and I think also tells us all why the Dayton Agreement was so important for all of us in Bosnia and Herzegovina. For me, this anniversary should be a big joy, a big reason to celebrate for everybody. And I hope I will be able to come back here in 5 years and tell you, or maybe even earlier, and tell you that we have finally the consensus on having this date as a national holiday. That would be my big wish that I want to share with you today. Right now we do not have this, mostly because we have different views on the 20 years behind. And that's why I suggest that we all, from today, turn definitely and irreversibly to the future. My key message is that if we are able to find anything better than Dayton Agreement that will be acceptable for everybody in Bosnia and Herzegovina, for all three constitutional people, for both entities, then let's have it. But if we do not, let's use this frame, this great frame that helped us face all our fears, ambitions, frustrations. And let's work together, let's communicate more, let's find solutions more, and let's look for more reliable, accountable, responsible leaders and politicians. And I'm sure it can provide very good result. Finally, I want to say that also my stay in the United States of America for the entire week is a signal and is a symbol of my deep appreciation and respect for the Dayton Agreement, but also for the United States of America. Because United States of America played a big role in this, and they were one of the key factors why we finally had the stop of the war exactly 20 years ago. And of course, it is my great honor, it is my great pleasure to be able to stand here in front of you and to be joined in a few minutes with the President of the United States of America at that time, who actually was, this was me speaking about the United States of America as a state, but he was personally the most responsible person, let's say so, for really having this and this United States Peace Initiative being brought to the final phase and being finalized here in Dayton, Ohio. So let me now ask Mr. President, President Bill Clinton, to join me and to address you. It is my great pleasure to be here together with him today. He would say, 20 years ago that I would be here as minister, meeting you, but it's a great thing.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Foreign Minister Srnadak, you got laughs in the audience when you said you were a young man 20 years ago. Heck, even I was a young man 20 years ago. Thank you for your service and for your presence here today. I want to thank Ambassador Insko, the High Representative to Bosnia and Herzegovina, and all the ambassadors and diplomatic leaders from the region, from Bosnia and Herzegovina, Montenegro, Croatia, Serbia, and of course the U.S. Our ambassador is here from the United States to Bosnia. We had a wonderful, Maureen Cormack, where are you? There you are, stand up. She took me to dinner with our whole delegation when we were over there recently for the 20th anniversary of the events in Srebrenica. And Mr. Foreign Minister, as an example of our support and belief in the future of your nation, her daughter is also there working in your country, so we believe in you. I want to offer my deepest sympathies to the government of Bosnia and Herzegovina and the people for the 2 soldiers that were shot yesterday. It's worth noting that apparently the man who shot them had a history of mental illness, but also had a brother who was in Syria, which brings me, or will bring me shortly, to one of the points I want to discuss today. Mayor Whaley, thank you and all the people from Dayton for welcoming us here. We were laughing backstage when I said that I had finally gotten around to finishing David McCulloch's wonderful biography of the Wright brothers. And I remember thinking at the time, 20 years ago, it's really a good thing we're going to Dayton because our odds of success are about as good as theirs was. And the Wright brothers and the negotiators surprised the world. The results were good both ways.
I want to thank two members of Richard Holbrook's family for being here. Cotty Martin, thank you. His wife and his son, David, thank you for coming. I believe Dick Holbrook was the most gifted diplomat the United States produced during the entire Cold War era. And I do not believe we would be here celebrating this event today had it not been for his skills, his determination, and his uncanny ability to read just about everybody he dealt with, even Mr. Milosevic. I want to thank the other guests here, but I'll forget someone, but I have to say a special word of thanks to my long time friend, Wes Clark, who by accident of fate, by the time I became president, was a rising young officer then serving in the Pentagon, and later was Dick Holbrook's principal support on our peace team in Bosnia, and later was the NATO commander when we prevailed in Kosovo, another success story that endures to the present day. And I want to thank Chris Hill and Peter Galbraith, who are here, two of America's most gifted diplomats. My wish were both still in full-time public service. We could use them today. I can't even talk about some of the things Galbraith did, but they were all good. You just have to trust me on that. In his book about how the Dayton Agreement came about, Dick Holbrook wrote that success, quote, requires flexibility on tactics, but a constant vision toward the ultimate goal. That was essential to forging a peace 20 years ago, and the presence or absence of that very element every day in Bosnia and Herzegovina today, in no small measure defines the progress or lack of progress, the promise or continuing problems that you've been discussing in all these panels. I could almost sit down now. I thank all the people who've participated in the panels. I find it fascinating that all of you and all of us are still as interested and committed as we were 20 years ago. Fascinating and deeply encouraging. We're back here to celebrate one victory in what has turned out to be an ongoing contest across the globe between violence and negotiation, cooperation and conflict, inclusion, and winner-take-all politics. And the whole question of human identity, whether we can only celebrate our diversity in an interdependent world when we recognize that our common humanity matters more, or whether we can only be faithful to our diversity if we're willing to kill everybody that disagrees with us. There is still a lot of work to do, as all the panels have discussed, to reap the full promise of Dayton. We all know that it was made possible in part because the facts on the ground changed, not only with the NATO air campaign after Srebrenica, but also because of the fighting that was done by Croatian and Bosniak forces changing the distribution of land control. And we all know that basically we ratified, with some necessary geographic adjustments, the facts on the ground and created a federation which in theory had a national government to handle national affairs, and then a Republic of Srpska and the Bosnian Republic to handle domestic affairs with the special area in Bihać. But what has too often happened over the last 20 years is that the Federation constituent parts have become an excuse to keep anything from happening. And we're all sitting around here thinking today about what could be done to break the impasse. It is clear if we want a successful Bosnia-Herzegovina as a single, stable, prosperous democracy, there'll have to be continuing economic and political reforms, the reduction of corruption, the increase of genuine broad-based economic opportunity. I'll tell you an interesting story. When we were at Srebrenica, those of you who are familiar with this know that every year on the anniversary, the remains of those who have been found and identified are interred in a religious burial ceremony. So we were having this event commemorating the 20th anniversary inside the battery factory with about 700-800 people, while the people were gathering outside to grieve their buried loved ones and to await everybody coming out. There must have been, 40,000 people out there, and it was hot. So at the end of the ceremony, one of the things that happened that no one commented on, but I observed, is we came outside and we had to make our way up the hill because the so-called VIP seating was on top of the hill. And the burial sites were over here, and the canopy set up for the imams to do the religious work was on our right. So I was wending my way through the crowd, and I saw an important thing. All the older people, the older Muslim women with their headscarves, were embracing me and thanking me and saying how glad they were to see me. The younger men, who were either not alive when we did all this or were very young, had blank looks in their faces. Not quite hostile, but far from sold. Why? Because still for too many people there, just like places in this country and all across the world, they think every tomorrow will be just like yesterday. And it is a very important lesson to remember as we think about the changes that have to be made going forward. It is wrong for any bloc to continue to seek political advantage through stalemate that robs young people of their possibilities in life. The elected leaders have got to take the lead in this, but the United States and the friends of Bosnia and Herzegovina have to support them, including the international community. I got a call today from the offices of the 2 United States senators who accompanied me to Srebrenica. One Republican, Roger Wicker of Mississippi, one Democrat, Gene Shaheen of New Hampshire. Today they introduced a bipartisan bill, or they will in about 15 minutes, to establish a U.S. Bosnian enterprise fund to attract more private investment in small and medium-sized businesses in Bosnia. These things are essential to the growth of that economy, but they don't have much access to financing. If we can get some progress here, my foundation has been working with KKR, the biggest outside investor in Bosnia, to figure out what we can do to get more people to come in on their own. We don't have a great deal of time because the headlines are being grabbed by larger, more immediate crises that affect more people. But the truth is, Bosnia is just as important as it ever was. It is the canary in the coal mine in terms of Europe's potential to be united, free, democratic, and at peace for the first time since nation states arose on the European continent. We made it 20 years, but we have more to do. I would like to ask you to take just a few minutes to think about whether what we learned at Dayton and what we've learned since have any relevance to the challenges we're facing across the world today. I believe that if you look at these 20 years, if we learned anything, it's that we've gotten more and more interdependent. If we learned anything, it's that borders look more like nets than walls. All states have less monopoly over power, influence, and a variety of forces than they once did. In many places, we celebrate this. The internet has been the greatest instrument of economic empowerment and human enlightenment in history, and also the most effective modern device for accelerating destructive forces. We all know what kind of damage you can do with a cell phone, but after the East Asian tsunami, when I was working for the UN, we gave one of those cell phones to every fisherman we put back in the water, and their incomes went up an average of 30% because for the first time in their lives, they knew what the price of fish was up and down the ocean. So we're living in this world where we have to, it's almost like your brain is split every day. It is so full of danger. And our hearts go out to the French, and I hope our admiration. This was, I told somebody after this Paris event, I said, 20 years ago, we had a terrible time getting the French to approve what, as Wes Clark knows, the United States wanted to do in early 1993, take military action, try to change the facts on the ground, move things along. But we knew we couldn't own a small part of Europe, that we had to do it together. And the French were frankly affected, among other things, by memories of World War II. And they were reluctant. But once they realized they had been lied to at the cost of 8,000 lives in Srebrenica, and the market in Sarajevo was bombed, we had no stronger allies. And I knew exactly what was going to happen when Paris was attacked. And I think they have the admiration of the whole world. And I was thrilled with the results they achieved yesterday. But anyway, we've got to ask ourselves, are there lessons we learned that could have some bearing on what we're doing today? First, I have taken, ever since the Paris attacks occurred, I have said this in every talk I've given. Most of us are not in government. Most of us have no control over national security decisions or even local police forces. But we still are citizens in the battle for an inclusive future. Inclusive economics, inclusive politics, inclusive societies. And winning over the long run depends upon not just stopping bad things from happening, or even holding the people who do bad things accountable. We also have to make good things happen. If I listen to some of these debates in America about the border with Mexico, and you would think there were 50 million people coming across the Rio Grande every day, and if we just had 5-story high brick wall, everything would be hunky-dory. In fact, between 2010 and 2014, there was 0 net in-migration from Mexico. Legal or otherwise. None. Why? Because we and their friends, and for their own efforts, helped them build a more sustainable economy. 140 new universities. A country with a third of our population graduating more than 100,000 engineers per year, we only graduate 120,000. A country that once had unbreathable air in its largest city, now with cleaner air than Los Angeles on a good day. When the United Nations said we'd like to plant 1 billion trees as the UN's contribution to global warming, a conservative president of Mexico said, I'll do half. We need to clean up the air. And he did. What's that got to do with Bosnia? Everything. The point is that every citizen has some capacity to build the positive and reduce the negative forces of our interdependence. Every citizen has some capacity to bring us together while others are trying to tear us apart. And that's the real challenge of the 21st century. The open hand, the clenched fist. Cooperation or conflict. Endless coming together in small steps, 2 steps forward, 1 step back, or just let things disintegrate. So look back at what led to the success at Dayton. How can we use that both in the Balkans and in the larger world? I had the great good fortune to be the first American president since World War II to serve my entire term after the Cold War. It was clear that the end of the bipolar world would open a vast new array of possibilities and reopen some ugly old dangers, because we could no longer think of ourselves in 2 camps, and the states and the international system that supported them ability to exercise total control over force was bound to be eroded. We live with that today. So I asked myself then, how can we, the United States, maximize the upside and minimize the downside of the end of the bipolar world and the opening of the information age? One of the things I decided to do was to either strengthen or create as many networks of cooperation as I could. In our own neighborhood, we reinvigorated a 30-year dormant institution called the Summit of the Americas. And every 4 years since 1994, we meet with our neighbors and plan the future. We started a meeting of the Asian Pacific leaders every year and kept expanding it to include people up and down our side of the Pacific in South America. That's the first place I sat with the Prime Minister of Vietnam a few decades after the end of the Vietnam War. And I'm sitting with this guy, and he said, he never said a word. He said, you know, my brother was killed in that war. I said, that's what my briefing said. I knew that. I'm sorry. And he said, I know that you opposed it, and I appreciate it. I said, thank you. But I said, I want you to know, if we made a mistake there, it was a mistake of the head, not the heart. We were not coming to colonize you or control your future. He said, I know that too. We're going to be the best friend you ever had in Asia. There we were, hundreds of thousands of people dead in this war, 58,000 Americans. Today, another 20th anniversary, they're our strongest ally in Southeast Asia. You have to make something good happen. You can't just stop bad things from happening. That is the lesson of all these disturbances in our cities in America. That is the lesson of all these troubles we're having in the world. Look, I want to stop the bad stuff from happening. I cheered the French when I read the newspaper this morning. But if you want to win over the long run, in a world where you cannot possibly control everybody, and where borders look more like nets than walls, you have to make more good things happen. What does that mean for Bosnia? we better hope and pray this enterprise fund succeeds and gets funded at 2 or 3 times what they think they can get it for now. And all of you who have any ties to that part of the world should consider whether we should do more to invest in them, to give their children better education, and to fund their business enterprises and their human potential. Second thing I wanted to say, it seems to me that flawed though it was, the Dayton Agreement proves that after people who spent a good deal of time hating each other, fighting each other, and killing each other, you have to have inclusive politics. And it's amazing how much resistance there is to it. As I said, we all know that, and I saw Wes Clark nodding his head up and down, we all know that a lot of the diplomatic successes were made possible by changing realities on the ground and by the NATO air campaign. But when the bombs stopped dropping and the people stopped shooting, to hold them together, everybody's got to have a stake in the outcome. So despite the obvious flaws in the Dayton Agreement from the point of view of the fact that it allows paralysis to occur, it did have power sharing without which we would not be here 20 years later. Best meeting I had when I was over there was with the tripartite presidency of the Federation. And it was amazing. The whole rhetoric, the body language, everything was different than it was just a few years ago. The capacity to do what they want to do is lacking. The ability of the head of the Republika Srpska, who won the election by 1 point, to stop anything from happening is lamentable. But in the end, it reminds us that we all have to practice politics. We're going to have inclusive governance or we're not. Once in a while, you get somebody who's in the position to put the hammer down and goes for inclusion anyway. Example A, Mandela. I keep in my presidential library in the apartment where I stay when I go down there a copy of the South African ballot. There were 19 candidates. Many South Africans were illiterate, and so there was a picture of the candidate and the flag that was his party symbol on the ballot. Unbelievably enough, the guy at the top of the ballot looked exactly like Mandela. He looked like Mandela's younger brother, and cleverly picked a flag with the same colors as the colors of Mandela's party. And Mandela still got 63% of the vote in a hotly contested next one. So anyway, we were doing all this business, and we would always talk late at night in America because he was older than me and he liked to get up early, and he knew I would stay up late, and so he'd call me. And one night he called and he said, "Oh, they're giving me hell." I said, "Who, the Afrikaners?" He said, "Oh, no, 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 my people." And I said, "What are they saying?" They're asking me why I am putting in my cabinet the leaders of the parties who kept me in prison for 27 years and beat and shot them while I was in jail. They said, "Madiba, you've just got 63% of the vote. And you're going to put these people in your government? Are you out of your mind?" And I laughed. I said, "And what'd you tell them?" He said, "I didn't tell them anything. I asked questions." I said, "Let me ask you something. We just voted for the first time in 300 years. Can we run the banks all by ourselves? Can we run the military by ourselves? Can we handle our science and technological issues and our natural resources all by ourselves? He said, is there one thing in this whole country we can run all by ourselves? The answer today is no. Maybe someday this is not that day. He said, now I'm the one that was in prison for 27 years. If I can deal with it, so can you. Get over it. We have to do this together. So he built a modern political state. My point is, he would be the first to say, were he still alive and here today, that he was in prison a long time, burning the hatred out of his soul. And we can't afford to send every good recruit in every country in the world to prison for 27 years to get their minds and hearts right. And we're going to have very few elections where anybody can beat 18 other people with 63% of the vote. So we actually have to make real compromise that we're forced to make or choose continuing conflict. That's what happened. But there were some moments, some Mandela-like moments. I remember how miserable Bosnian President Izetbegovic was when he had to initial the deal on the 21st day of the agreement. You remember? And then he said, this is not a just agreement, but it is more just than a continuation of the war. Killing people is very expensive, not just in money or even in the lives that are lost, but what it does to the people who take those lives. And to all of our children and our grandchildren. Somebody's got to show up and make a different choice. I just got back from Israel about a month ago, less than a month ago, observing the 20th anniversary of Rabin's assassination, because just a few days before he was in Washington with me giving the Palestinians the biggest chunk of land they still have to live on. Cost him his life. And he was killed by a young Israeli who thought he was doing God's will because Rabin was giving away a piece of Judea and Samaria that God had given to the Jews. The president of Israel, President Rivlin, gave a brilliant speech in which he said, I always disagreed with Rabin on this. I never thought we could give away the land and preserve our security. But he was a great man, and we stand for peace and freedom. And I will never agree to let the man who murdered him out of prison. He was under a lot of pressure to let him out until he renounces violence and admits that what he did was wrong. In other words, a big part of this is not only inclusive governance, but accepted, self-imposed limits on what you will do. I actually was in a political fight once in Washington, and with a man that I had a very good personal relationship with. He said, you know what your problem is? There are some things you just won't do. And that puts you at a terrible disadvantage. And I said, yeah, that's true, but what a disadvantage it is. It's what makes freedom possible. It's what makes democracy possible. It's what makes progress possible. Those people at Dayton knew when they signed what problems they were leaving on the table. Those who have gone on to their eternal rewards would not be surprised. But it was better than killing. And let's not forget that there were casualties there too. Those of us who were part of that will never forget the loss on Mount Egmont Road of Joe Cruzel, Bob Frazier, and Nelson Drew. I'll never forget Wes Clark racing down the side of a mountain, burning his hands on a car, trying to take them out and save their lives. Nothing about any of this is free. Early next year, I will have to celebrate the 20th anniversary of the death of the man who was probably my closest friend in the cabinet, the Secretary of Commerce, Ron Brown. He and Chuck Meissner and all these other members of the American government and business people were killed when they ran into a mountain in Croatia trying to bring economic opportunity to the people of Bosnia. They died for peace too. After the investigation of the crash site was completed, a Croatian sculptor climbed up on that mountain and gathered little pieces of the plane that had been left behind and rocks and bolted the pieces of the plane to 10 rocks. They were his sculptor tribute to our efforts to find a shared peace. He sent the first one to Ron Brown's wife, the second one to me. I don't know where the other 8 are, but I know where mine is. It's on my mantle at home, so I look at it every single solitary day of my life that I'm home, to remind me that none of this is free, but it's far better than the alternative. Finally, let me say that my most vivid memory of our return to Srebrenica and my meeting with the presidency and all of that was the astonishing speech given at Srebrenica by the 36-year-old mayor of the city, who stood up and said, "I am the accidental survivor. My father was killed, my brother was killed. Every single male classmate in my school was killed. Why I was not found in the woods, even after 20 years, I have no idea. It was fate, it was luck." But I have tried to use my life to make sure nothing like that ever happens again. And then he pointed at the 39-year-old Prime Minister of Serbia. And he said, "I invited him." He's 39. He had nothing to do with what was done to us. And we have to make a new beginning. There are few final victories in politics or economics. So if you pick that part of your life, that to give your life to, it's just something you got to live with. The ultimate victory has to be in the way they're conducted. That's what democracy is all about. That's what majority rule and minority rights and human rights is all about. That's what building the capacity of governments is all about, and reducing corruption is all about, because there are few final victories or defeats. So the way you do your business is everything. We should celebrate what happened 20 years ago. We should give our gratitude to everyone in the last 20 years who could have derailed it, who didn't. And we should say, we're going to finish this job. Because I don't ever want to go back to Bosnia again where only the old people are glad to see me. I am one of them, and there are fewer of us every trip. Those young men with the vacant looks in their eyes should light up at what they think their future is. Only then can they be told about the sacrifices of their forebears to bring them to this and have it mean anything to them. Meanwhile, those of you who understand what happened at Dayton, what brought it about, and what made it successful here, all those who are here and those like Richard Holbrook and Warren Christopher and John Shalikashvili, who've gone on to their ultimate reward. You need to be able to share that. But you can only share it with people who can hear. And they can only hear if they see you behaving today in a manner consistent with what was done then. On balance, I'm pretty hopeful. Look, this is a tough slog, but just remember this, there is always a difference in every age and time between the headlines and the trend lines. And the trend lines today are almost always better than the headlines. It is perfectly true, for example, that since the crash, the financial crash, only 16% of the American people have had an increase in their income of any size after inflation. That's a pretty good headline, and everybody knows it. It is tragically true that non-college educated, middle-class white Americans have their life expectancy going down because more of them are abusing drugs and alcohol and overeating and doing a lot of other things because they don't have anything to look forward to when they get up in the morning. But I also learned that Dayton's gained population 3 or 4 years in a row for the first time since the 1940s. That's also true. It's just not a headline, it's a trend line. What we have to do is make more trend lines that are good. If you do it long enough, sooner or later it becomes a headline. Sooner or later the light comes back on in the young men's eyes when they go to remember Srebrenica every year. Sooner or later there's a guy running the Republic of Srpska who thinks it'd be a good deal if they voted with the others so that growth and investment could come to all their children. Stay the course. That's the only way to be faithful to the people who gave their lives and to the wisdom of the late President Izetbegovic. An unjust peace is more just than continuing death. Choose life. Thank you.